The day the first trucks began unloading debris into the old quarry, Ethan Walker immediately sensed that something was wrong. What he didn't realize was that this single decision would eventually cost the HOA millions of dollars. By the time everything was over, the entire board would be forced to step down. Ethan owned a large piece of property just beyond the quiet town of Ridgewood. Years before, he had purchased the land because it included a huge abandoned stone quarry. Most people looked at the site and saw nothing more than a giant empty hole surrounded by steep rock walls. Ethan saw opportunity. One day, he hoped to transform the quarry into a beautiful lakefront retreat. He imagined cabins overlooking the water, peaceful walking trails, and a place people would come to relax and enjoy nature. At the same time, Ridgewood was expanding rapidly. A nearby HOA-managed neighborhood was experiencing construction boom, and with all that development came a growing problem: waste disposal. One afternoon, Ethan heard the distant growl of heavy engines approaching the access road that led to the quarry. Curious, he stepped outside and watched as a large dump truck slowly rolled down the dirt path. Then another followed, and another after that. Within minutes, construction waste was being dumped directly into the quarry. Broken lumber, drywall scraps, cardboard packaging, and other building materials cascaded into the massive pit. Ethan stood frozen in disbelief. No one had contacted him. No one had asked for permission. Across the hillside, the HOA neighborhood looked as calm and orderly as ever, giving no indication that anything unusual was taking place. But Ethan understood exactly what he was witnessing. Someone had decided that his property was the perfect place to get rid of construction debris. And once he discovered who had authorized it, everything was going to change. The people responsible believed the quarry had been abandoned long ago. What they failed to understand was that Ethan Walker legally owned every inch of that land, and he had already begun documenting everything. At first, Ethan convinced himself there must be some sort of misunderstanding. Perhaps the construction crews had been told the property belonged to the HOA, but the trucks kept arriving. Day after day, more debris poured into the quarry. Before long, the once empty stone basin was filling with mountains of discarded materials: lumber offcuts, insulation, broken pallets, packaging waste, and other construction leftovers. Determined to resolve the issue quickly, Ethan drove to the Ridgewood HOA office. Inside, he calmly explained to the board members that the quarry was privately owned property and that he was the owner. The board listened politely. One member reviewed a map and shrugged. "Our records indicate that areas and used land adjacent to the neighborhood," the HOA president replied. Without raising his voice, Ethan placed a document on the table. It was the official deed proving ownership. The room immediately fell silent. Yet instead of ordering the dumping to stop, several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Well, one of them finally said, choosing his words carefully, "Construction is already in progress. Relocating everything at this stage would be difficult." Ethan stared at them in disbelief. They were essentially asking him to accept the fact that his private property had been turned into a dumping site. Although frustrated, he remained calm and left the meeting. What the board didn't know was that Ethan wasn't just a landowner. He was a former environmental consultant. He fully understood the legal and financial consequences of unauthorized dumping. That evening, he returned to the quarry carrying a camera and a notebook. He photographed everything: truck license plates, company logos, load after load of debris entering his property. If the HOA believed they could quietly use his land without permission, they were about to learn a very costly lesson. And Ethan was already building the evidence. Within a week, the quarry looked nothing like it once had. The giant stone pit was rapidly filling with construction waste. The workers paid little attention to Ethan as he stood nearby taking photographs. Most assumed he was simply a curious resident observing the activity. What they didn't realize was that he was carefully documenting every detail: every truck arrival, every delivery company, every load of debris, every time and date. Late one afternoon, he noticed something particularly valuable. One truck carried the logo of a major contractor working inside the HOA development. Ethan approached the driver politely. "Who authorized dumping here?" he asked. The driver answered without hesitation. "The Ridgewood HOA board approved it," he said. They told us this quarry was their temporary disposal site. That single statement confirmed everything. This wasn't an accident. The HOA hadn't simply made an innocent mistake. They had made a deliberate decision, and they had done so without verifying who actually owned the property. That evening, Ethan contacted an environmental law firm. When an attorney reviewed the photographs and documentation, the reaction was immediate. This goes beyond simple trespassing, the attorney explained. It could qualify as unauthorized commercial dumping. The implications were enormous. Cleanup expenses alone could potentially reach millions of dollars. Still, Ethan wasn't seeking revenge. He simply wanted the debris removed and the damage corrected. His attorney sent the HOA a formal legal notice demanding the immediate removal of all dump materials. 3 days later, the board responded, and their response made the situation significantly worse. Instead of apologizing or agreeing to fix the problem, they refused. The HOA board believed they were in a strong position. Their letter argued that the quarry appeared abandoned and had seemingly been in use for years. Because of that, they claimed, removing the debris would place an unreasonable financial burden on the association. Ethan read the letter carefully. Then he smiled, because the response revealed something important. The board still had no idea how serious the situation had become. His attorney immediately filed claims related to property damage and environmental violations. When inspectors arrived at the quarry, they quickly recognized the magnitude of the problem. Dozens of truckloads of construction waste had been deposited without authorization. Several materials required specialized removal and environmental remediation procedures. With every new inspection report, the estimated restoration costs continued to rise. The numbers climbed higher and higher. Eventually, the projected cleanup expenses reached a figure that stunned even the HOA's own legal team. Several $1 million. Before long, news of the situation began spreading throughout the Ridgewood community. As word of the situation spread, homeowners who had trusted the HOA board to make responsible decisions began asking difficult questions. Why had the quarry been used as a dumping site without anyone verifying who actually owned it? Why had the board ignored a formal legal notice instead of addressing the problem immediately? Meanwhile, Ethan remained remarkably patient. He wasn't interested in public arguments or emotional confrontations. Instead, he allowed the legal process to continue naturally. With every passing day, the evidence against the HOA became stronger. Eventually, the HOA's insurance company was brought into the matter. After reviewing the documentation, their reaction was swift and unmistakable. Settlement discussions needed to begin immediately, and the numbers being considered were far beyond anything the board had anticipated. By the time negotiations officially started, the situation had become impossible for the HOA to dismiss. Environmental restoration estimates continued climbing. Massive quantities of debris would have to be removed from the quarry. Soil testing would be required. Specialists would need to evaluate potential contamination. Restoration and remediation efforts would take significant time and resources. The insurance company carefully reviewed every report, photograph, inspection record, and legal filing. Their recommendation was simple: settle the case immediately, because if the dispute proceeded to court, the final financial consequences could become even more severe. When the first negotiation meeting took place, the difference in confidence between the two sides was obvious. The board members appeared tense. Ethan arrived calm and prepared. Seated beside his attorney, he brought a folder containing weeks of collected evidence: photographs, inspection reports, truck records, property documents, and every piece of supporting documentation gathered since the dumping began. After hours of discussion, the insurance representative finally addressed the room. "We are prepared to resolve this matter through a financial settlement." Negotiations continued. Eventually, a final figure was agreed upon: $7 million. The room fell silent when the amount was announced. For the HOA board, the number was devastating. What they had viewed as unused land had become one of the most expensive mistakes in the history of the neighborhood. Ethan accepted the settlement under one condition: the cleanup had to be completed properly and under professional supervision. The insurance company agreed. But the story didn't end with the payment. Throughout the entire ordeal, Ridgewood residents had been watching closely, and now they wanted answers. News of the $7 million settlement spread rapidly across the community. At the next HOA meeting, residents arrived in large numbers. They came with questions that the board could no longer avoid. How had dumping been approved on land the HOA did not own? Why had the board failed to stop the activity after receiving formal legal warnings? Why had anyone checked the property records before making such a decision? The board members struggled to provide convincing answers. Some insisted they genuinely believed the quarry had been abandoned. Others admitted that ownership records had never been verified before approving its use as a disposal site. For many homeowners, those explanations simply weren't good enough. Although the settlement had been covered through the HOA's insurance policy, residents understood that the consequences would still affect everyone. Insurance premiums would likely increase. The community's reputation had suffered, and confidence in the board's leadership had been badly damaged. During one particularly tense meeting, a resident stood and addressed the room. "Leadership comes with responsibility," he said firmly. The statement immediately changed the atmosphere. People nodded in agreement. The board members understood exactly what it meant. Within days, resignation letters began arriving. One by one, board members stepped down. Soon afterward, the entire board resigned. A new group of residents volunteered to take over management of the HOA and restore trust within the community. At the same time, cleanup crews began work at Ethan's quarry exactly as required under the settlement agreement. Truck after truck hauled away construction debris. Gradually, the enormous stone pit began returning to its original condition. The mountains of waste disappeared. The landscape slowly recovered. For Ethan, the victory had never been about money. What mattered most was protecting his property and ensuring it was treated with respect. Yet the lesson Ridgewood learned would outlast the cleanup itself. The quiet quarry outside town had become a powerful reminder of an important truth. Never assume that land belongs to no one. Months later, the quarry looked peaceful once again. The debris was gone. The towering stone walls stood clean and exposed. Open space had replaced the piles of construction waste. One evening, Ethan stood near the edge of the quarry and watched the setting sun reflect across the rock surfaces. For the first time since the trucks had arrived, the property truly felt like his again. The settlement funds also allowed him to pursue the dream he had envisioned years earlier. Plans were already underway. The quarry would eventually become a beautiful private lake surrounded by trees, walking paths, and carefully designed natural spaces. While Ethan moved forward, Ridge would change as well. The new HOA board operated very differently from the previous one. Every major decision was carefully reviewed. Property records were checked. Residents received clear communication. Transparency became a priority. Because everyone remembered what had happened when assumptions replaced responsibility. What started as a simple effort to solve construction waste problem had ultimately become a lesson worth millions of dollars. And the quarry that many people once dismissed as abandoned land became the reason an entire HOA leadership team lost their positions. Sometimes the biggest consequences begin with what seems like a small decision. And sometimes protecting your property doesn't require anger or confrontation. Sometimes it simply requires standing your ground, documenting the facts, and allowing the truth to reveal itself. And that was a final twist in this remarkable HOA story. If you enjoyed this story and its surprising outcome, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support helps the channel continue bringing more stories like this one.